The woman lived where the land stayed quiet, and wide the desert stretched around her like an endless breath sand. Moved slowly with the wind, and the sky felt heavy most days. She had been alone for a long time, not alone in the way of empty land, but alone in the way of a heart that had learned to be still. Her husband had passed seasons agoness, had taken him slowly, and left silence behind since. Then she spoke little, and listened more. At morning she woke before the sun, and each night she slept when the stars rose high. Her home was small, made of old wood and stone, placed by careful hands. Long ago she kept it clean because it gave her something steady to do. She cooked simple meals and saved what little she had. Every item mattered because nothing came easy anymore. She survived by helping where she could. Some days she cleaned for travelers. Some days she traded bread for grain. Most days she walked the edge of the desert to gather dry wood. It was quiet work, and suited her. She could think without being watched. She could remember without being questioned. The desert did not rush her that evening. The sun leaned low and painted the ground with soft gold. She walked farther than usual, chasing the last light. Her arms held a small bundle of wood tied with cloth. As she moved past a rocky bend, she felt something change in the air. The wind grew still. The silence felt deeper than before. She stopped walking. Her heart beat faster, though she did not know why. Then she saw him. A man lay near the stones, half covered by dust. His body barely moved. At first she thought he was already gonna butt. Then she saw a small rise in his chest, slow and weak. He was badly hurt. His clothes were torn and dark with dried blood. His skin burned with fever. He was Apache. Though she knew better than to say such things out loud, the land had taught her to notice without judging. Fear came quickly. Stories she had heard as a child rushed back into her mind. Warnings from neighbors: do not help them. Do not get involved. Always follows. She stepped back one pace, then another. Her hands shook. Helping him could cost her safety. It could cost her home. It could cost her life. She turned as if to leave, but her feet did not move far. Something pulled her back, not bravery, not courage, something quieter. She remembered her husband lying weak on their bed. The long nights, the thirst, the waiting. She remembered how kindness had mattered more than medicine in those moments. She walked back to the man. She knelt beside him. Slowly the ground was cold beneath her knees. She placed her hand near his mouth to feel his breath. It was there, but faint. Needed water. She had only a small amount left, enough for herself. For 2 days she hesitated, then lifted his head gently and let drops fall onto his lips. He did not wake, but his mouth moved slightly. She stayed with him as the light faded. Her bundle of wood lay forgotten behind her. She tore a strip of cloth from her sleeve and pressed it against his wound. She was no healer, but she knew enough to stop bleeding. Desert had taught her that much as darkness came, fear returned. Coyotes cried in the distance. Shadows grew long and sharp. She looked around, knowing she should not be there after nightfall. Still she stayed. She whispered soft words, not prayers, not promises, just sound to keep herself steady. Her thoughts wandered to her empty home, the cold hearth. Single bowl on the table. She wondered if she would see it again, but leaving the man now felt like leaving herself. Behind hours passed. Slowly stars filled the sky. The man stirred once and groaned softly. She gave him more water, even though it left her flask nearly empty. She wrapped him in her shawl, though the night air cut into her skin. She did not know his name. She did not know his past. She only knew that he was human and hurting. That was enough. As the night deepened, she leaned against a rock and stayed awake, listening, watching, waiting. The desert held its breath with her. Far away the horizon hinted at morning. She did not know then that this night would change her life. She only knew that she had chosen to stand. Sometimes that choice is where every story begins. The night stretched on, and the desert was quiet except for the whisper of the wind across the sand. She stayed close to the man and kept watching him. Every breath he took was slow and shallow. She had wrapped the shawl around him, but it was not enough to keep all the cold out. She realized that helping him could bring danger. Settlers might not like her helping someone they saw as an enemy. The tribes could be angry if they thought she meant harm. She understood this well from years of living on the edge of the land, but she could not leave him. Her thoughts went back to her husband. Again, the night he had grown worse and she had had nothing to ease the pain. The memory stung her chest. She wished she could have done more for him, Now she could do more for this man. It was a small chance, but it was all she had. She remembered the small store of medicine she had kept hidden. Her husband had left it for emergencies. She had used almost none. Now she took it out. The vials and powders were small but precious. She did not hesitate. She gave him a little water mixed with medicine. She applied a paste to the wound as best as she could. Her hands were steady, even though her heart pounded with fear. She did not know if he understood her words. She spoke softly anyway. Her voice was like a thread in the vast night. She asked him to hold on to life. She asked him to stay with her until the sun rose. It was strange to ask someone she did not know for this, but it felt natural to speak to a person so close to death. She stayed awake all night. Every now and then he moved slightly. She cleaned his wounds as best as she could. Every motion was careful. Every movement was love. The nights seemed to stretch endlessly. She thought of the days when her husband had still lived as she thought of the meals they had shared, the quiet evenings by the fire. Now the house was emptier. It's only company, the wind, and this stranger. Who needed her? She wondered if she was strong enough to save him, but there was no turning back. The man groaned softly once. She held his hand. Lightly she could feel the warmth of life still. It gave her hope. She whispered words to him, not prayers, not curses, just sounds to keep him near the world of the living. She told him to rest and let the night pass. Wind shifted days, soft breeze brushed across the rocks. She pulled him closer to shield him, though. Desert can be harsh, and she knew that Avon for someone stronger than she looked at the stars and thought about the path that had led her. Here loneliness had brought her patience. Grief had brought her courage. It was strange how the hardest things in life could also teach strength. She remembered that. She had a small cloth bag of food she gave him, small bites. His eyes fluttered, but he did not wake. Completely she ate nothing herself, because she needed to give him strength first. Hunger was small compared to fear of losing him. Hours passed slowly. She watched his breathing, kept his body, warm whispered stories from her past to fill the silence. She spoke of the desert and its hidden flowers, of the nights when the wind sang soft songs. She spoke of memories of her husband who had taught her kindness. She spoke as if the night itself listened and absorbed her words. At one point she felt hopelessness wash over her. The man looked so weak. She thought about leaving, but she could. Another heart would not allow it. Instead, she pressed a cloth against the wound. Agon reassured him softly, even though he could not respond. She thought about the people in her village, ones who had warned her about helping someone like him. She always thought about the rules that had always been around her, but she decided that rules meant nothing compared to life. Life mattered more than fear. She remembered the stories of the elders, how kindness often returned when least expected, how helping a stranger could change everything. It was hard to believe when fear sat heavily on her shoulders, but she believed anyway. Her body grew tired. Her knees ached from kneeling on the cold earth. Her hands were stiff from working on the wound. Her eyes were dry from the wind, but she stayed awake. She would not let him fade away while she could do something. Then she noticed that the desert was beginning to glow faintly. The first signs of light touched the rocks. The night was ending. She did not know if he would survive until the sun rose, but she could see that the medicine had helped. The bleeding had slowed. His chest rose more evenly. She felt a small wave of relief. The man moved slightly and groaned. She placed her hand gently on his shoulder. His eyes flickered open for a moment. He looked at her without speaking. She smiled softly. It was a small sin, but it meant he still wanted to live. She continued to speak to him, encouraged him to hold on a little longer. The desert seemed to change with the coming light. The wind carried less bite. Shadows shortened. The night released its hold. Her mind wandered to what might come next. She did not know if he would survive after the night. She did not know if others would come for him. She only knew that for these hours she had done everything she couldn't. That mattered more than anything. She stayed beside him until the first true rays of the sun touched the sand. The desert glowed orange and gold. The night of fear and worry passed slowly behind them. She looked at the man whose life she had chosen to protect. She saw hope returning to him, even if it was fragile. She realized that helping him had taken more from her than she expected, in strength or food, but in courage and care. Yet She also realized that it had given her something new, a connection to life that she had thought she lost. She held his hand as the sun rose higher. She felt the warmth on her skin and in her heart. The desert was awake, and so was she. And she understood that the night of waiting had been a turning point, a moment where fear met kindness, and kindness held strong. The sun rose slowly, and the desert glowed with soft colors. The woman stayed beside the man as the light touched the stones and sand. She could see the warmth return to his skin and the strength in his breathing. He still looked weak, but alive, she felt. A deep relief that she had not known she could feel. The long night of waiting had passed, and she had been strong enough to stay. She thought about the past and the choices that had led her to this moment. The years of grief and loneliness had made her quiet, but they had also taught her patience. Patience had kept her here through the cold and fear. She understood now that sometimes life asks for patience more than speed. She spoke softly to the man who lay before her. Words did not matter as much as presence. She wanted him to know he was not alone. He stirred and opened his eyes a little more. He looked at her without fear. A small flicker of recognition passed through him. She smiled faintly and continued to give him water and food. He drank slowly, but with effort. She encouraged him with quiet words. It was strange how connection could be formed without speech. Stezida taught her that eyes and hands could speak as clearly as voices. She thought about the dangers that might come. Travelers and settlers might not approve of her actions. The tribes might be upset if they found him before he was strong. She knew she had to be careful. But her care came naturally. She wrapped him more securely in her shawl and prepared small amounts of food. Hours passed slowly. The desert seemed to breathe with her. She noticed the small animals that came cautiously near her camp. They seemed to sense her presence and the quiet energy of life she carried, and the wind felt softer now that the sun had risen. She thought about how fragile life could be. One night of weakness, and a person might be gone. She realized that small acts of kindness often carried great weight. Her husband had once told her that a moment of care could save a life or change a heart. She had forgotten his words in grief, but now she remembered them. Clearly, she helped him sit up slowly. The effort made him wince, but he did not complain. She supported him carefully. She could feel his muscles trembling from weakness. She gave him small bites of food and sips of water. She stayed close enough to help him if he fell or lost balance. He looked at her, and his eyes held questions. She shook her head gently and smiled without speaking. Her hands moved over his wounds to check for bleeding and irritation. Everything seemed more stable than before. Her confidence grew as she realized her care had worked. She thought about the hours of the night, how she had stayed awake without sleep to help him, how fear had pressed on her heart, and how courage had pushed her hands to action. She realized that helping another person could bring its own reward, not gold or comfort, but the quiet knowledge that she had done something good. She noticed a bird flying over the desert. Its shadow passed over them, and she watched it glide. It reminded her of freedom and the flow of life. She wanted the man to feel that same flow too, feel that he could return to his people and survive. The man tried to speak. His voice was weak. She could not understand him, but she nodded and encouraged him with a look. They did not need words. The connection between them was enough. The sun rose higher and the desert heated gently. She felt sweat on her brow from the effort of holding him and tending to his wounds. She moved with care so he would not feel discomfort. Every small gesture mattered. Every touch was a thread of life she was weaving back into him. She thought about what she could do next. She had food and water, but little medicine left. She considered fetching more, but realized it might be too far. The desert could be dangerous for her alone. So she stayed and planned carefully. Time passed slowly. He gained strength with her care. The steady attention and gentle encouragement worked as much as the medicine. She realized that presence and patience were the greatest healing tools. She felt the wind shift again. The sounds of the desert changed. The rustle of small creatures moved closer. She sensed life returning all around Evan. In the vast quiet, she was not alone. Life surrounded them. She spoke quietly to him about small things. Color of the desert stones, the shape of the clouds, the path of the wind. Her voice was calm and soothing. He listened in his weak waven, if he did not understand. Her words carried energy. She adjusted the shawl and checked the wound again. The bleeding had stopped completely. The skin was less swollen and red. She smiled faintly to herself. Progress had come. She felt hope growing in her chest. She thought about the next steps, how to get him moving again, how to help him regain strengths. She prepared small portions of food and water for the coming hours. Everything had to be done slowly, every action measured. She thought about the kindness she had given, how it had changed both their lives. The desert was a place of solitude, but also of connection. She had given life, and it had returned in small signs, though. Man tried to sit up again. She helped him. With care, he leaned against her. For balance, she spoke softly to reassure him. He responded with a small nod. It was enough for now. The sun climbed higher. The heat became gentler on their skin. The desert held them in its quiet embrace. She realized the night of fear had passed. The morning brought relief and the first step toward healing. She stayed with him as he rested and drank. Her presence was steady and patient. No words were needed. The energy of care flowed between them. It was a silent miracle of connection. She thought about her husband again, how he would have smiled too. See her kindness, how he had taught her to see the strength inside herself. The desert had tested her patience and courage, and she had passed the test. Time moved slowly and carefully. She watched him breathe and drink and eat. The man was still weak, but alive. Every small movement was a victory. Every small breath, a sign that life had returned. She continued to speak softly about nothing in particular. Her voice was calm and steady. It soothed both him and herself. They shared the quiet hours together. Fear only the slow rhythm of life. And Karaz, the day progressed. She helped him sit and stand in small increments. Her hands steady, her eyes watch for every movement, measured to prevent pain or injury. She realized that patience could heal as much as medicine. The desert seemed alive with small signs of life. She noticed a small lizard moving near the rocks, the sound of wind moving through stones. The flutter of birds high above reminded her of the larger flow of life around them. She spoke to him about these small things, described them in simple words. If he could not respond, he listened. It mattered that he felt connected to the world again. The afternoon approached, and she continued her care. Every gesture, gentle every step, slow. Her own body tired, but her spirit alert. She had chosen to stay, and she would continue. She thought about the next night, how she would need to watch him again, prepare food and water, keep him warm. The dessert was harsh, but she had grown stronger through her choice. She realized that this night had changed her, not just in caring for another, but in understanding her own courage. Her patience and presence had brought life back. Even slowly, even if the danger was still near, she held his hand as he rested, felt the warmth returning, saw the color in his skin, and knew that her choice to help had been the right one. Desert had tested her, and the gift of care had become a miracle. The morning light grew stronger, and the desert warmed slowly. The woman stayed close to the man, whose strength was returning little by little. She could see color in his cheeks and the movement of his chest, more even than before. Each breath he took was a victory. She felt a quiet joy in her chest all through the long night she had watched and waited. Now she could see the small miracle of life. Turning, she helped him sit up slowly. Her hands were steady and strong, every movement measured to prevent pain. He leaned on her for support, and she held him. The shawl wrapped around his shoulders kept him warm. The desert air carried the scent of dry sand and distant plants. It was calm, safe for now. She spoke softly to him about the sun rising higher, about the colors in the sky, about the way the rocks held shadows even in the light. Her words were simple, her voice steady. She wanted him to feel that the world still cared of him, if only through her presence. He tried to move a little more. She helped him stand. His legs trembled, but he did not fall. She guided him step by step. The ground was uneven and sharp in places. She kept him close and steady. Every movement was careful, every step measured. As they moved toward a small patch of shade under a rock, she saw movement in the distance, small shapes emerging over the horizon. At first she thought it was travelers or hunters. Her heart beat faster, but then she realized the shapes were a group of people moving toward them. They were members of his tribe, the Apache. The man looked at her with eyes wide with understanding. He had recognized them before they reached them. The woman stepped back a little to give them space. Man struggled to greet them. She watched silently. The tribe approached carefully, not with anger, but with concern. Their Eyes met hers, and they understood. She had helped one of their own. Survive the night, the man tried to speak again. The words were weak, but his meaning was clear. He had survived. She had kept him alive. The tribe members smiled softly. Some nodded, some knelt to check his wounds. Their movements were careful and respectful. She felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her actions had been dangerous. Helping him could have brought anger, but instead it brought gratitude. Desert held its quiet stillness around them. One of the tribe members brought water and food. They helped him drink and eat. She watched as he regained strength. Every small action was gentle and patient. The tribe had not judged her. They had recognized her courage. The man held her hand for a moment before he stood fully. He looked at her, eyes filled with gratitude. She smiled faintly. It was strange how life could return through care, through patience, through courage. The tribe stayed close around him. They checked his wounds. They spoke softly among themselves. They gestured for her to remain safe. She nodded. She had given her help, and now it was time for them to take him. Bakshi watched as they prepared to leave. He stood supported by the tribe members. He looked back at Hera. Silent thank you passed between them. She felt the warmth of life and connection in that moment. Desert felt alive in a new way. The sun shone more brightly. Wind moved gently through the rocks. Even the smallest creatures seemed to carry energy of the morning. She felt part of that energy, a quiet bond with life itself. Man walked with support. She walked beside them for a few steps, ensuring he could move steadily. Then she stepped back and let them go. The tribe guided him across the desert. Their presence was strong, their care evident. She watched until they were small shapes in the distance. Her heart felt full. She had given her gift, and it had returned as life and gratitude. The desert was quiet again, but not empty. It carried the memory of care and connection. She realized that this moment would stay with her. The night of fear, the long hours of tending, the patience and courage she had discovered within herself had led to this small miracle at sunrise. She thought about the man and his tribe, how lives had been changed by one small act, how kindness and courage could cross boundaries of fear and loneliness. Desert had taught her that much. She returned to her small home slowly, her body tired, but her heart awake. She felt stronger than before. She had learned the power of being present, the power of giving without expectation. She carried the memory of the sunrise and the miracle it had held. The desert had been harsh and silent, but it had also been the place of connection, the place where life returned through care. She thought about the days ahead, how she might continue to live with the knowledge that she had saved a life, that she had faced fear and acted with courage, that her gift had returned as more than she could have imagined. The desert stretched around her, bright and warm in the morning. Sunshine felt the quiet pride of survival, of courage, of small miracles. She knew the night would be remembered by all who had witnessed it, and that the gift she had given would continue to echo quietly in the lives of those she had helped. The desert was calm and warm as the woman returned to her home. Night and sunrise had passed, and a new day stretched ahead. She felt the quiet strength in her chest from what she had done. Man she had saved and his tribe were gone now, but their presence lingered in the soft wind and golden light. She walked slowly over the rocks and sand. Every step reminded her of the long hours she had spent by his side, the long hours of waiting and caring. She entered her small home. The walls were plain and familiar, furniture simple, but it felt different now. The space carried a quiet energy from the night of miracles. She could feel life had returned to the desert, and to her heart she placed the few items she had used carefully back in their places. The shawl she had wrapped around him folded neatly, small medicine vials stored away for another emergency, everything in order, everything meaningful. She thought about the tribe and the man who had survived. She remembered his eyes, quiet understanding that passed between them. Without words they had connected, and without promise she had given him life, and that gift returned quietly. The village nearby had begun to stir with the morning. She saw a few people walking in the distance. She did not approach them. Her mind stayed with the desert, with the man who had survived, with the knowledge that kindness mattered more than fear. She thought about the days to come, how she might continue to live with this experience. The desert had tested her patience and courage. It had rewarded her with a quiet miracle. She realized that life could change in a single night through. Single act food and water would continue to be her concern, but now she carried hope that she could continue to give, hope that she could continue to witness life returning through caravan, if in small ways. She thought of her husband, of the quiet nights when he had been ill, how she had felt powerless then. Now she had power to give life, even if small and fragile. The day moved slowly. She tended her home and her small garden. Everything she touched felt more alive. Wind whispered through the rocks, and she listened. The desert carried stories of courage and life that she understood now. The woman considered what had passed, the fear of helping someone outsiders might not approve them. Danger of anger from travelers or tribes, the long hours of care, the nights spent awake, all of it had led to life returned. All of it had led to understanding herself. She remembered the man standing with his tribe, the silent thank you in his eyes, the quiet respect of the people around him. It was more than gratitude. It was connection. It was life renewed. Her body was tired, but her spirit felt awake and alive. She carried water and prepared food. Carefully she tended the house. She walked the desert edge. As every small task carried meaning now, everything she did was quiet and full of life. The sun climbed higher, the desert glowed. Golden the birds moved above, small animals stirred even. The wind felt full of energy. She felt a part of that energy, a part of life itself. She thought about what she could teach others, not with words but by example, patience, courage, kindness, simple acts. That carried great weights. She realized her life could inspire change even quietly. In the distance she thought she could see movement, perhaps travelers, perhaps others who needed course she would not hesitate against. She had learned the power of giving and staying. She had learned the quiet miracle that could happen when fear met courage. She prepared a small meal and ate slowly. She thought about the night she had spent awake, how fear had pressed on her, how patience had guided her, how life had returned. Through small acts of care, the desert felt different now, harsh and silent, but alive with energy and gratitude. She felt the rhythm of life around her, the movement of sun and sand, the quiet breathing of the earth. She thought about the man again, the tribe, how lives had been changed, how a single act of giving could carry life forward, how kindness could cross boundaries of fear and solitude. Her hands moved over the small items in her home, the shawl, the medicine, the few belongings she had. Each one held memory. One carried the story of life returned. She walked slowly to the edge of the desert, looked out over the rocks and sand. Wind carried warmth and the scent of life. She understood that she was not alone. Even in solitude, there was connection. Even in quiet, there was strength. The day moved on. She tended to small tasks, prepared water and food, checked her home and garden, every action, deliberate every motion, a continuation of care and life. Memory of sunrise stayed with her, the moment when the man had opened his eyes, the moment when his tribe had arrived. Quiet thank you passing between them, all of it carried a deep meaning she could feel in her chest. She knew that life would continue, that challenges would come, but she had learned patience and courage. She had learned the value of being present, the power of giving without expectation. Quiet miracle that could happen when one acted with heart. Evenings were calm and the desert stars stretched across the sky. She remembered the long night, how she had stayed awake, how she had chosen to command, how that choice had changed everything. Her heart carried peace, her mind carried knowledge, her spirit carried courage. The desert was alive and she was part of it. Life had returned through care and patience. She walked slowly to her small home, prepared a fire, sat quietly, watched the sky change colors. The desert held stories of courage and life. She felt connected to it. All the days continued. Food and water, every small act held meaning. Every small action connected her to life. She thought about the future, how she could continue to live with courage, how she could continue to give life in small ways. The memory of the man and his tribe remained a quiet reminder of what kindness could do. She understood now that miracles are not always loud or grand. They can be quiet, subtle, found in the care for another, the courage to stay when it is easier to leave, the patience to act when the night seems endless. The desert stretched endlessly, the sun moved slowly, life went on around her, and she moved with it alive, with knowledge alive, with care alive, with the quiet miracle she had witnessed and helped create. The desert was quiet in the early morning light, and the woman moved slowly across the sand and rocks. The days since the miracle had passed quietly, but she felt the energy of life returning all around her. A movement of the wind and every rustle of the small animals seemed alive with meaning. She walked with care, noticing the small plants pushing through dry sand. The stones glowed gently in the morning sun. Her heart felt light and awake. She carried a small bag of food and water as she moved toward the edge of the desert. Her mind reflected on the past nights and days, the man she had helped survive, and the tribe who had come to take him safely. Memory filled her with warmth and quiet pride. She understood now that kindness could cross boundaries, fear could be met with courage, and patience could bring life. She remembered the long night she had spent awake, the fear and uncertainty pressing on her heart. Wind moving through the rocks like soft whispers. Quiet moments where she had spoken to him even if he could not respond fully. The connection had been enough to sustain them both. She looked at the horizon and saw the sun climb higher. The desert seemed endless and alive. She felt small yet strong. The world felt connected in the smallest ways. Every leaf, every stone, every breeze held a story she had witnessed life returning through. Karan, that story was hers to carry. She reached a small rise where she could see far across the desert. The man and his tribe had gone, but the memory of their presence lingered. She thought of their gratitude, of the silent thank you that had passed between them. Her actions had mattered. Her courage had mattered. Her patience had mattered. She prepared a small meal and ate slowly. She chewed quietly while watching the desert. Warmth of the sun on her skin felt gentle. The wind carried the faint smell of dry plants and distant water. She felt connected to the world in a new way. Her hands moved over the food and water carefully. Everything had meaning, even the smallest act of nourishment carried life. She thought of how she had given her gift hand, how it had returned quietly in the survival of another. She walked down toward a small stream that trickled through rocks. The water was clear and cool. Shy washed her hands and face, felt the liquid awaken her senses. The desert held life even in places she had not noticed before. The man she had saved would drink from similar streams as he returned to his people. She smiled quietly at the thought. The day moved slowly. She thought about the long hours of care, how she had stayed awake through the night, how she had feared but acted anyway, how her small acts had returned life and hope. She realized that her presence had been as important as her actions. She moved across the sand, watching shadows stretch across stones. She noticed small footprints of animals, delicate tracks of birds in the soft earth. Even these small signs reminded her of life. The desert was alive in ways she had not fully seen before. Her heart carried gratitude for every small miracle. She remembered the lessons of the past nights. Patience, kindness, presence. Moment had taught her something about life and about herself. Man she had helped was alive because she had stayed, because she had chosen to attend. That choice had created a ripple in the quiet desert. She walked toward a shaded area under a rock formation. She sat quietly and observed the movements of the desert. Wind shifted through the rocks, making soft sounds. A lizard moved carefully along. The sandbirds called faintly in the distance. Small details of life felt alive and important. Thought about the future, how she could continue to live with courage, how she could continue to give life in small ways. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, carried meaning. Every decision to act with heart had consequences beyond her sights. Remembered the night of struggle, the man lying weak and injured, the fear that pressed on her chest, and the courage that had pushed her hands to action. She realized that life often asked for bravery in quiet ways, and she had answered. The sun climbed higher and the desert warmed. She moved with care and attention. Every step measured, every gesture deliberate. The desert carried the rhythm of life, and she moved in tune with its. She thought about the man and his tribe, how lives had changed, how gratitude and connection had flowed silently between them, even if words had not been exchanged. Even if danger had been near, the bond of life had held. She reached the edge of a small canyon. The shadows played across the rocks. The light reflected softly on the sand. She felt the power of presence and action in her chest. Every small choice she made mattered in ways she could not fully see. She prepared a small place to rest and ate her food slowly. she thought about the quiet strength she had discovered in herself, the patience to wait and watch, the courage to act despite fear, the kindness that could return life. She walked slowly back across the desert, observing the small signs of life, the birds moving above the wind, shifting through stones, the plants reaching toward sunlight, all reminders of the quiet miracle she had witnessed. Evenings came softly in the desert. Stars stretched across the sky. She sat quietly and thought about the night she had spent awake, how she had chosen to stay, how life had returned through her care, how courage and patience had created a small miracle. Her heart carried peace and knowledge. Her spirit carried courage. She had learned that even small acts could hold great power, that kindness could bridge fear, that life could return through care and presence. The desert stretched endlessly around her. The sun moved slowly, and the wind whispered softly. Life continued quietly all around, and she continued with it, alive with understanding, live with care, alive with the quiet miracles of the desert. She moved slowly to her small home as the day ended, prepared a fire for warmth, sat quietly, and watched the sky change colors. Though desert held stories of courage and life, she felt connected to every part of it. Her hands moved over the small belongings in her home, the shawl, the medicine, the simple items she had. Every piece held memory, every piece carried life. She walked slowly to the edge of the desert, looked out over the rocks and sand. The wind carried warmth and the scent of life. She understood she was part of the larger story, even in quiet moments, even in solitude. She carried courage and presence. She carried life. The desert was quiet and warm as the woman moved through the soft sand and rocks. Her steps were careful and steady. As she walked toward the distant hills, the memories of the nights she had spent caring for the man and the sunrise that had marked the miracle stayed with her. Every movement in the desert seemed alive with meaning, and she felt part of it all. The wind brushed her skin gently, and the sunlight reflected softly off the stones. She carried water and a small bag of food, knowing that the desert required patience and preparation. Her mind reflected on the days that had passed since the miracle. She thought about the man and his tribe and the silent gratitude in their eyes. She realized that life could change in a single night through courage and presence and simple acts of kindness. She had learned that small actions could carry great weight. In the world, she walked to a small rise that gave her a view across the desert. The horizon stretched endlessly. Rocks glowed in the warm light, and the sand shifted slowly with the wind. She felt a quiet peace in her chest and a gentle awareness of the flow of life around her. She had been alone before, but now she understood connection in a way she had not known. In solitude, life could be full and meaningful. She found a shaded area under a rock formation and rested. Her body was tired, but her mind and spirit felt awake. She thought about the long night she had spent awake, the fear and uncertainty, the careful tending of wounds and water, the constant vigilance that had kept life alive. Every small choice had mattered, every act of patience had returned life. She sipped water slowly and looked at the desert around her. The small creatures that moved through the sand, the wind shifting through the rocks, even the distant sound of birds in the sky seemed alive with energy. She realized that her gift had returned quietly, but powerfully. The man she had saved would live. The tribe would carry the story of her courage and kindness, and she would carry the memory of that miracle. She thought about the nights and days ahead, how she could continue to live with the lessons she had learned, patience, courage, and the quiet power of giving without expectation. She prepared her small meal and ate slowly, watching the desert. Every movement carried attention and awareness. Every action held meaning. Sun moved higher, and the desert warmed around her. She walked slowly toward a small stream that trickled through rocks. The water was clear and cool. She washed her hands and face and felt the liquid awaken her senses. She thought about how life returned through simple acts of care, how patience and presence had created a small miracle. She moved carefully across the desert, observing every detail. Footprints of animals in the sand, the fluttering wings of birds, the movement of the wind across the rocks. Everything seemed alive. Everything seemed connected. She felt a quiet gratitude for the life around her. Mind returned to the man and his tribe. how lives had been changed by her courage, how gratitude had flowed silently between them without words or recognition from others. The connection of life had held strong. She walked to a small rise and looked toward her home. The desert stretched endlessly, and the sunlight glowed softly on the rocks and sand she felt small, yet strong and part of a larger flow of life. Every small act she performed carried weight and meaning. The desert had taught her patience and courage, and she carried both now within her. The afternoon moved slowly. She prepared small portions of food and water for the coming. Ours every action deliberate and careful. Her thoughts drifted to the quiet power of giving, the way presence and patience could return life. She understood that courage was not always loud, could be quiet and steady and powerful. She sat under the shade of a rock and observed the desert. The wind shifted gently through the stones. The small animals moved with care. Birds flew in the distance. The desert was alive and full of small miracles, and she felt connected to it. All she thought about the nights she had spent awake, how fear pressed on her chest, and how courage pushed her hands to action, how patience had allowed life to return. She realized that even small acts of care held the power to change the world. Sun moved lower in the sky and shadows grew longer. She walked slowly across the sand, noticing every detail, the colors of the rocks, the movement of the wind, the patterns in the sand. Every small moment held meaning. Every small action mattered. She thought about the future, how she could continue to live with courage and patience, how she could continue to give life in quiet ways. Every act of kindness, even small, carried significance. She understood now that life was sustained by these quiet miracles. She returned to her small home as the day ended, prepared a fire, and sat quietly watching the sky change colors. Though desert held stories of courage and life, she felt connected to every part of either heart. Carried peace and knowledge. Her spirit carried quiet courage. She moved through her home, carefully tending her small belongings, the shawl, the medicine, and the simple items she had. Each piece held memory and meaning. Carried the story of life returning through her karaz. Evening settled. She walked to the edge of the desert. The wind carried warmth and the scent of life. She understood that she was part of the larger story of life, even in solitude, even in quiet moments. She carried courage and presence, and the power of giving. She carried life and the quiet miracles she had witnessed. The desert stretched endlessly under the rising sun, and the woman walked slowly across the sand and rocks, feeling the warmth of the morning on her skin and the gentle breeze carrying the scent of dry earth and distant plants. Her steps were careful yet steady as she moved toward the hills that lay far ahead. She carried a small bag of food and water, knowing the desert required patience and preparation, and as she moved, she thought about the past nights and days and the man she had saved, the one whose life she had held in her hands through the long hours of the night and the first light of the morning. When the miracle had seemed to shine upon them all around her, the desert seemed alive with movement and energy. Every whisper of wind, every rustle of small creatures seemed connected to her in some quiet way. She felt part of the flow of life, and she knew that her actions had made a difference. She walked slowly toward a small rise where she could see the land stretching endlessly before her. The sun glowed softly on the sand and rocks, and the shadows of the stones shifted with the warmth of the day. She paused to look at the horizon, thinking about the man and his tribe, and the silent gratitude in their eyes. The memory of the moment when life had returned stayed with her as clearly as the wind that brushed across her face. She understood now that even small acts of courage and kindness could carry meaning and could ripple out to affect others in ways she could not fully see. Her steps were careful as she moved down a gentle slope toward a dry creek bed. She paused to take water from her small bag and sip, slowly letting the cool liquid awaken her senses. She thought about the night she had spent awake, how fear had pressed on her heart, and how patience and courage had guided her hands to act. How each small motion had kept life alive. She realized that even in the quiet desert, life had demanded attention and care, and that giving both had returned life in a way that felt almost sacred. The desert seemed more alive than she had ever noticed the movement of the small animals across the sand, the shadows of birds above the distant rocks, the subtle shift of the wind across the stones all spoke of life in motion and connection. She felt a quiet gratitude for every small detail. observed each tiny act of survival in the desert mirrored the larger miracle she had witnessed when the man had opened his eyes at sunrise, and the tribe had come to claim him safely. She continued her walk toward a patch of shade under a cluster of rocks. Finding a comfortable place to rest, she set down her bag and took a small meal, slowly chewing. In savoring the quiet of the desert, she reflected on the lessons she had learned: patience, courage, kindness, presence. Every choice had mattered, and every act had carried weight, even when it seemed small or unnoticed. She understood now that true courage was not always loud, and that true miracles could occur in silence and in the steady rhythm of care. Her eyes followed the patterns of the desert as the sun rose higher. The sand shifted slowly, and the rocks glowed with warm light. She noticed small tracks of animals that had passed recently, and the gentle movement of the wind and the stones. The desert was alive and vibrant, even in places that seemed empty, and she felt a deep connection to it all. She understood now that every living thing in the desert depended on care, even if only from itself, and that her care for another human had been part of this. Larger flow, the thought of the man and his tribe filled her heart with quiet warmth. She remembered the look of understanding in his eyes, the way the tribe had approached carefully, without anger or judgment. The silent gestures of gratitude and respect. All these moments had been powerful and transformative. Even if no words had been exchanged, she understood now that life could be changed in subtle ways by acts of presence and courage. She packed her small bag and continued walking across the sand, noticing the subtle changes in the light and the wind. The desert was never still and never quiet. It was alive with rhythm, in movement, and she moved with it, her steps deliberate and careful, each motion a continuation of care and observation. The small stream of water that trickled between rocks provided refreshment and a place to pause and feel the cool liquid on her hands and face. She thought about how the man would drink from similar waters as he returned to his people, and felt a quiet smile of satisfaction for the life she had helped preserve. As the day moved on, she noticed the small plants reaching through the sand, the delicate flowers that had survived the harsh conditions, the shadows shifting on the rocks, and the distant sound of birds. She realized that every small detail of life held meaning, and that even the smallest creatures were part of the miracle she had witnessed. Her heart carried gratitude for all the life around her, for the quiet energy that connected her to the desert, and for the lessons of patience, courage, and kindness that she now embodied. She found a shaded area and sat quietly observing the desert, thinking about the nights and days that had passed, the long hours she had spent awake and vigilant, the fear that had pressed on her chest, and the courage that had guided her hands to act. Every choice had mattered, and had carried weight. Every small act of kindness had returned life. She felt a quiet strength in herself that she had not known before, and understood that she could continue to live with patience and courage and presence. The sun climbed higher, and the heat of the day increased. She moved slowly across the sand, adjusting her steps to the uneven terrain, observing every detail. The small movements of the creatures around her, the patterns in the sand, and the distant flight of birds. The desert was alive with stories, and she felt connected to each one. Her heart held gratitude, and her mind carried the quiet understanding of the power of presence and care. She walked toward a distant rock formation that offered shade and a place to rest. And as she moved, she thought about the future, how she could continue to live with courage and patience, how she could continue to give life in small ways, even when unnoticed. Every act of kindness, even subtle, carried significance and had the power to create ripples of life and change across time and space. Reaching to shade, she settled down and prepared a small meal, eating slowly and mindfully, noticing the warmth of the sun on her skin and the gentle breeze that carried the scent of the desert. She reflected on the quiet miracles she had witnessed and created the night. She had stayed awake for the man whose life she had preserved through courage, patience, and kindness. Every small motion had mattered. Every small choice had returned life, and she carried that knowledge deeply within her. She observed the desert as the afternoon moved on. The light shifted and shadows lengthened. The wind moved gently across the sand and rocks, carrying with it the subtle sounds of life, the movements Of small animals and birds, the delicate rustling of plants, everything seemed alive and connected. She felt a quiet joy in being a part of this rhythm of life, understanding that her presence and her actions had been meaningful and transformative. As evening approached, she continued her walk, observing the changing colors of the desert. The long shadows stretching across the sand, the glow of the rocks in the fading light. She thought about the lessons of courage and patience and kindness she had learned. She understood now that life was sustained by these quiet miracles, and that even small acts of care could ripple out to change the world in ways that were subtle yet profound. The sun set slowly, casting a warm orange glow across the desert. The shadows deepened, and the wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant plants. She found a place to rest, and watched as the day ended in quiet beauty. The memory of the man and his tribe, and the miracle of life returning, stayed with her. The silent gratitude and the gentle connection created by care and presence filled her heart with warmth and understanding. Night fell, and the stars stretched across the sky. The desert was alive with energy, and she felt connected to every movement, every sound, every whisper of wind and shift of sand. She understood that even in solitude, life could be full and meaningful, and that courage and kindness could return life even when fear pressed on the heart. In every small act could carry great significance and power. She carried these lessons with her in every step, in every breath, in every thought, as she moved through the desert with care and presence and love.